Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. For the next few weeks, we'll be talking about becoming Christian and what that means. I didn't want to lose touch in light of what's been going on lately, of what it meant to be a follower of Christ. And I just wanted to share some of those thoughts with y'all. A couple of years ago, I was teaching the kids at church, and I asked a question. I said, what does it mean to be saved? And one boy raised his hand, and he said, it means to ask Jesus into your heart. So then I asked him, what does it mean to ask Jesus into your heart? He paused, smiled, and just shrugged his shoulders. So then I asked the rest of the kids, what does salvation mean? And none of them wanted to tackle that one because asking Jesus into your heart was already used as an answer. But in my mind, which is not much different than the kids, really, I started thinking of this miniature Jesus turning a knob that's on our hearts, walking in and sitting down on this mini recliner in the room of our hearts. And I just prayed, Lord, I hope this isn't what the kids think salvation in Jesus really means. But what if it was what they thought? And what if other people, adults even, think the same thing? Or even something just as misleading as a mini Jesus living in our chests? At that moment, I had to make sure that my church babies understood salvation correctly. I didn't know, or still don't know, where this ask Jesus into your heart answer came from. But salvation is infinitely more and infinitely better than just that. So these next few weeks, I want to go over talking about salvation. And my hope is that you'll come away more assured about what it means to be a Christian, because being called a Christian is the most noble thing in the world. It gives you this intimate association with the Creator, Redeemer, and King of the universe. Now, as great as that sounds, we got to start the story with some bad news. Because in order for us to know how good the good news really is, we have to know that there's bad news. And that bad news is known as sin. And the idea of sin has been lost on us recently. We developed all these new connotations for evil in the world, and the concept of sin has become old-fashioned. But I think it's time for sin to make a comeback. I think a good general definition of sin comes from Wayne Grudem's systematic theology. And in it, he says that sin is any failure to conform to God's moral law in act, attitude, and nature. And the standard for that moral law is God's character and his commandments, not mine or yours or other people's opinions or lives. So we can't compare ourselves to our neighbors and say, hey, I must be doing all right. At least I'm not like that guy. Because the guy we really got to compare ourselves to is Jesus. And I wouldn't put my money on myself to be worthy of heaven if I needed to be as good as Jesus on my own. So where did sin come from? And why does it involve us? Well, the fall, or maybe we should call it the leap, because the defiant acting of breaking God's command was intentional. Our earliest ancestors, Adam and Eve, defied God, and they wanted to live by their own standards and not by God's. And in doing so, the consequences of their disobedience became the plight for all of humanity. This is known as original sin. Think of it as sin inherited. the nature, the condition of sin inherited. It's been passed down to every human being since the leap, or if you like the fall better, you can say that. And I know it doesn't seem fair, but this concept is all around us. If you played football, you know if someone on your team commits a penalty, the whole team suffers the loss of yards together. And on a more serious note, if someone does something reprehensible, society usually treats those that are closest to that individual as if they committed the same crime. So the family or the really close friends of that individual suffer consequences by association, whether it's unfair or not. So sin is not a victimless crime. Others are always affected by it. And even worse news is that everyone, without exception, well, Jesus is the only exception, but everyone else, without exception, is a sinner. Somewhere I read that we're not sinners because we sin. We sin because we're sinners. We've inherited this nature, this condition from Adam, and it shows itself in a variety of ways. The ways in which we act out sin is called personal sin. Think of it as personal sin as symptomatic of the depraved nature or condition we all have. And every sin, no matter how small, has the same general consequence, even though sometimes the specific temporary consequences may differ based on the act or acts of sin that we commit. But that general consequence is eternal separation from the Creator, Redeemer, and King of the universe. And unfortunately, in the present, it doesn't cross the minds of many people to know where our sin may be leading us. But as J.C. Ryle said, and I know I've said this before, hell itself is truth known too late. So every human being inherits a defiant, corrupted condition or nature from Adam. We're all born into it. Sin does not discriminate. This is known as original sin. The evidence that proves the existence of original sin are the acts that we commit that we shouldn't, or even the acts that we should do that we don't. All of that makes us fall short of God's standard. This is known as personal sin. Sin forever separates us from God, and there's nothing we can do about it. But there is something that God did, and we'll continue that next week. So enjoy the rest of the week, brothers and sisters, and we'll see you next week.